Okay, so let's continue on. So we did some manipulation of NURBS surfaces. So in case you were wondering, like you might have not been able to see some of the same menus I have here. And the reason that might be is that you might have not created a NURB surface, but a polygon shape. So I'm just going to move these out of the way here, and we're going to go ahead and go over what the polygon options are. So polygon primitives are a little bit different. Let's go ahead and create a sphere, for example. So let's look at the polygon primitive. So essentially it looks very much like the NURBS. It really default number of sides here is very different. If we go down to, let's create another object here, and I'll go ahead and say create and a NURB sphere, and we'll compare these two here. I'll put them side by side. So you notice this has less spans and sections than the polygon, and that's because the polygon is really just drawing each individual square here is a polygon, whereas with the NURBS shape, these hulls or isoparms, which are these lines here, basically between each isoparm they're generating a certain number of polygons to make it look smooth. So that's not the case with a polygon shape. So what else is different about the polygon? So before we were selecting what we were calling control vertexes. So if we go back to our component mode, and let me turn off the hulls, for example, you remember that the control vertex doesn't sit on the surface of the object. It's sort of these points, when we make 3 of them at least, they're projecting a curve or a sort of a shape, right? It's shaping that object. Whereas if we go to the polygon, we have the vertex. So if you click on a vertex, you'll see that you can move it out. It's really just a solid point. So it's very pointed. You know, it is just a polygon. It doesn't have that smoothness to it. So, you know, what you see is what you get basically with polygons. You're moving them and they're sitting right on the surface. The other thing you'll notice is, you know, if I go and select this, right, and I hit the number 1, right, it draws it more like a polygon. So it basically is assuming that each span is a polygon. Whereas if I could take this shape and go to 1, it looks pretty much the same. Now, that's not the case with all polygon shapes. So let's say if I go and create a cube, for example. And remember we had earlier talked about the cube as a NURB really has 4 different shapes, or 6 different shapes, whereas when we create a polygon cube, it really is just one object. So if we create a polygon cube, I'll scale it. I have a weird default size here, so let me scale that guy up. And so now if we try to smooth the cube, you're going to see something very interesting happening. So if I hit number 1, right, it's on basically a polygon. Number 2 will smooth it out, and number 3 will smooth it out without the box. So it's really a display thing. So this is kind of predicting if we had smoothed this out what it would look like, but really this is how it's going to render right now. So, you know, and this to, you know, where if we go back to 3 on the NURBS, we're going to see how it really, and this is all hardware, this is how we're going to draw it in hardware, because it's assuming that there's a certain number of polygons between each span. Now there are some advantages to polygons that the NURBS don't have. For one thing, you can select an individual face. So you'll notice if I go to face here, so in a surface of a NURBS, right, you'd have to select 4 points, and it's not really moving a face. It's moving the control vertexes that kind of control the shape of that face. But here, if we go to face, for example, and let's go back to component mode, and we say face, so I can select that face, and now I can move that whole face out, right? See that? Now I can also select a number of faces. So if I go back to Q, and then I hold Shift, I can select a bunch of different faces, right? And then I can pull those out. Okay, so that's something I can't really do with the polygon. So, you know, the difference is here you have hulls and control vertexes, and here you have faces and you have vertexes that you can manipulate.